So I'm gonna try to finish today the arrow. So I tried some approaches, but it was very annoying and it didn't seem that it was very good. Cause I got the code from 3GS again for the cylinder. And then I was trying to create the cylinder after creating the curve, and I was trying to make it based on the normal and binormal, so that I have the direction. But it was kind of annoying to figure out how to like align on the correct direction, because the problem is you never know what direction the arrow is gonna be. And also it was putting the arrow in the wrong position. It was putting at the origin, let's say, instead of the end of the arrow. So I decided to go another way, which I think is the simplest way possible and probably the best, given what I have here. But it's still not finished, let's say. But I managed to do like the arrow shape at the end, and I'm gonna try to figure out now the nuances of it, let's say. So there is one major problem. There's two problems, but one I think is a difficult one to think about, which is that depending on how you rotate the camera, the back of the arrow becomes invisible. And I think that's because of the way that Godot renders everything. So I think Godot by default only renders the front of the geometry, which makes sense because it's more optimal, let's say. So there's a lot of situations where it doesn't make sense for you to draw the back because the back is inside of the geometry. So for example, if you have a sphere, it makes more sense to render the surface of the sphere only and not the back of it, because you're never going to see the back. So the problem that this creates is these kinds of things where depending what kind of geometry you're creating, if you're gonna rotate, it's not gonna show the geometry. So based on ChatGPT answers, you can create a spatial material and then put the spatial material in the array mesh, and this allows you to specify for Godot to do the back face culling, which makes it render the other part of the face. And the other approach, which is the more confusing and annoying to get it right, and I'm not really sure if it's possible or not, but it's just changing the winding order, so the order in which you put the vertices. But that feels like way too complicated to me, because the way that I'm doing now is just by changing the segments here. So like I'm assigning the last two segments for the arrow, and what I do is just check based on the conditions that I put here. I changed this a little bit from last time and I still didn't compile, I think, because I'm trying to figure this out. But as it is now, the way that it's working is that the last two segments of the curve are dedicated for the arrow based on these conditions here. And the only thing that changes is the position. So like one before the last is like the circle that is going to make up the base of the arrow. So the things that changes is that I use the same position as the previous one, and I just change the radius so that the arrow radius is bigger than the normal radius, and I'm making currently based on the radius, so it's like 5 times. I'm gonna decrease this value, I think, but just making 5 now just to be very visible. And then the last position is just the 0 radius, so it's basically gonna be the point. So it's gonna generate one vertex for each segment of the base of the cylinder. So that when I generate the indices with this function here, which is the same one that I was using to generate the curve, I don't have to think about, and I think it's just easier that way. It is the way that 3GS does it as well. So just generate a bunch of points in the same spot, because you're going to connect all the base of the circle, the previous circle, with that spot. So the problem with this thing here, which I'm gonna try to think about how to solve this now, is that so there's one weird thing that it seems that depending on which kind of direction you go here, it doesn't allow you to zoom in too much. But I'm not really sure if this is because of Godot or like whatever what's happening here. But you see that the base here is showing in this direction, but then when you rotate, it disappears here. So that's the problem. So I'm gonna have to see after I figure this out if it's possible, just by setting the material of the arrow to maintain the things on the back here. Like this is less it's less visible if you have color, but because the color is kind of weird here as well. So, but like even if it doesn't show there, I think that's probably already good enough. I'm not gonna be caught up on the details because all that matters is that the arrow is visible from a distance and you can see like the direction of it for the stuff that I'm trying to do. Oh, this is another problem, is that when you face like this, it also disappears in the... But I'm not really sure. I think it does disappear because it's the same, yeah, it's the same stuff. And it might be because of the normals as well. So because I think that this, like this default visualization here, they create this light. And they probably do it like this because it's better to test with the light. So it might be the normals, which is another annoying thing to figure out. But basically the way that this is working is that on the last segment there, I'm just creating these other radios. And then the indices automatically create the connection in the correct way because it's just as if you're connecting the two different segments of the arrow, but you're connecting them on the same spot, so they creates the thing. And the last one is the end, and I think it's a lot easier to do this way because then I can use the Bezier curve equation to get the direction already automatically. But this is another problem because the way that I'm doing this now, I'm not encoding the segments. I'm just doing... So basically, the more segments you have is going to dictate the size of the arrow because it dictates the distance of the point. So the point here is based on this value, which is the last value that you pass through the cubic Bezier curve, which is going to be a value from 0 to 1. And I'm making now these values based on the curve segments. So I'm dividing I by the curve segments, so I have like these steps. They're going to build the cylinders. But the problem here is that I'm not taking into consideration the proportions, because so I'm gonna have to think about this now. I think there's two different things that make it easier. So like one thing that I was thinking about, but it is kind of confusing because it's kind of annoying, that like I can make based on total segments here. So there's two things. One is like first divide the amount of segments. So the arrow requires only 2 segments because it's just gonna be like 2 cylinders. And the main difference is the radius and the position. But so it's always going to be 2 segments, so I can make the total segments based on the curve segments and the arrow segments. But the issue with this is that if I make it like this, then if I allow people to change the... I'm not very sure if I'm probably not gonna... I'll think about whether or not I'm gonna share this code. But like if I allow the option to change the segments from the editor, then it's possible that the value becomes 0 if the... So like it's gonna be division by 0 here if the arrow segments is like, if people put a negative value. So I don't know, it makes it more likely that there's gonna be an error. So I think it might be better to just do 2. But the main thing that I have to... I'm not gonna do this, because the other thing is that when you change here, you have to change the indices here, because it's based on the same amount of segments that I'm building the connections there. So I was doing outside here before. So this is the thing that I'm gonna think about now. So the idea that I had is that like I realized that I don't have to put equal segments for each thing. I can puts like a percentage of for the arrow. So like I decrease the percentage for the arrow to the remaining length, let's say. So let's say 100% goes from 0 to 1, and then the arrow size is gonna have a default value like 0.2, and then 0.2 you decrease from 1, so 0.8 will be the segments for the rest of the curve. So that's all I have to do, and then I recalculate the Bezier curve using the other interval when it comes to the arrow. But I guess I can use 1 probably to calculate. So I think it's probably not that hard actually. So like if I divide, yeah, I think all I have to do is, so I'm gonna put the value there again. Let me remove this. I'm gonna put arrow size. This is the arrow height I think I was using. I'm gonna remove here based on the 3GS thing. Other function that I was using. I think I'm gonna put just arrow size. I can name. I was putting percentage because I think it makes more sense to be a percent. Like it is a percentage the way that I'm doing this. Like the arrow size is gonna be a percentage of the curve, and then the remainder is gonna be just segments. But I'm not sure if the name makes sense for like arrow size percentage or arrow percentage. I think I was doing arrow segments percentage. Arrow segment percentage. I'm just gonna leave arrow size. But this is, again, this is the other problem. Like if I allow it, but I think I'm gonna think about this later. How can I make sure I can put a condition there, like if the arrow size is smaller than I'm thinking. As if it's smaller or equal to 0, just do the segments. Yeah, so I think yeah, I'm gonna think about this later, but it's probably not that hard. So I think I already know a way. So what I'm gonna do here is just so I do the segments minus. Let me think. Because essentially on this shoe I don't need to put the. I'm gonna have to on the last one I have to recalculate the curve because I'm not gonna use segments anymore. So inside of here I'm gonna put position equals, and then I'm gonna put 1 at the last value. So that is gonna go from whatever was the last point to the end. But for each segment I need to determine the spread. So I think I can do it like this. I don't know why it's not. So let me think about. So I don't think it makes sense. This is kind of the confusing part because the way that I was doing before is like I minus it's like 1 minus the percentage for the arrow, and then that is gonna be divided by the segments. But if I'm dividing, it doesn't make sense to put it on top, I think. So, and I think it doesn't make sense for I should be in the bottom because so yeah, maybe I just do like the percentage. So this multiply by 1 1 minus arrow size. Yeah, there we go. So I don't know why is it seems that maybe the ternary doesn't make sense here. Oh no, it's because I'm using the yeah, there we go. So if the arrow size greater than 0 is I guess I can make a greater or equal. Yeah. Because if it is 0, then it's just gonna be 1. So it's gonna be the same thing. I guess it doesn't matter anyway because yeah. So maybe I'll do greater than 0 because then if it is 0, it doesn't do the calculation. But it doesn't change anything, I think. So this will make sure, I think, that the segments here for each one are gonna be the same length. Taking out the amount for the arrow. And then here I can make 1 here because 1 is gonna be the end, I think. Let me think if this makes sense. Yeah, because it's gonna be like the whole amount is gonna be 1 divided by curved segments multiplied by curved segments. So it's just 1. And then I'm just gonna copy the normals and everything. So here's gonna be 1. But this may or may not work. So this condition here is the last. Oh, this might be another. Oh no, because I think this is correct. So like curved segments is gonna be just the overall amount. So on the curved segments, I'm already gonna, because the conditions here already take into consideration there. So it's always gonna be true. So I think it doesn't matter. So this is probably correct. I think it should be correct. But I think I tried something like this and it didn't work. So it might not work because of the values here. Yeah, so I'm gonna try this one. So if this works, the next thing is to figure out the material thing. So I think that one annoying thing is that I think whenever you build a geometry or a mesh, and you instantiate, you initialize the member variables of the mesh inside of the constructor, it's gonna give you a warning there. I think that's the reason why the warning is showing up, because it's gonna be considered as default value for the thing. So if you don't want the warning to show up, you can't initialize the stuff on the constructor, and it has to be initialized on the class, I think. It has to be initialized on the editor. But yeah, and I think that usually the way people are gonna initialize, if they want the things should be initialized as you build the class, is to do it on GDScript. So it is kind of annoying that there is that warning there. I'm not really sure why they put it. Because if I'm building one of the main reasons to build a class from C++ is to be able to initialize everything programmatically. So if you want to build a bunch of things, like a bunch of instances of the same thing, it's not practical to change the values manually one by one. So people usually probably use GDScript for this. But if we're building a class on C++, it doesn't make sense. But I'm not 100% sure if that's the reason why they have that warning there. But it seems that it works, so I'm just gonna leave it like that. If it works, I think it's just gonna be annoying because there's gonna be a bunch of warnings when I create a bunch of stuff at the same time. But what I'm planning to do is just put on the constructor here. So like change, or I don't need to change it because the mesh inherits from array mesh. So just ask ChatGPT how to set the value of the mesh of the array mesh. Set the value of the material of the array mesh to be a spatial material, and then it should specify this stuff. And if this does work, then I'm gonna remove the other functions there. Hopefully it works. So can move on to other stuff. I think it didn't work, probably. I think it did work. Just the size is very big now. And this is kind of the issue. Hmm. It's like this is an issue. But I think it doesn't matter that much for the arrow to have this angle. Because like obviously you can adjust based on the size. But I think if the further the arrow is, then obviously the weird is gonna be. Weirder? I'm not really sure if that's a... But I think this works, actually. So nice. Because the problem is obviously the angle here, so obviously like it is not ideal because if the arrow was always correct, then the point here would be facing, like it would be in the center of the triangle. But the thing that is kind of annoying is that I think I tried to do based on the tangent, and then it's kind of annoying because the tangent's probably it's not always correct. So I also think I tried to do it based on the final point. So you get the previous point, and then you just multiply that by whatever scalar you want. So the vector would be in the same direction. So I guess I'm gonna try that first. But obviously, if it doesn't work, like all you have to do is just regulate based on the arrow size, and then it's gonna be roughly the same angle. So it's gonna be, and like this kind of things is just detail, so I don't think it matters that much. Like the main points for you should be able to see uh, the direction on the graph. That's what I care about. The rest is just micro optimization. I can move on to other stuff. I'm pretty happy with this. So what I'm gonna do is just test, just see what happens. So first I'm gonna remove the other functions that I put here. Yeah, so remove the stuff, then uncomment this other stuff to see still. I'm gonna test the thing first. So I want to build again. I'm gonna test Just see if changing. So what I'm gonna do on this one is instead of using this position here, I'm just gonna get the previous position and then multiply by the scalar, which is the I'm gonna multiply by another scalar just to test because the arrow size is meant to be a percentage, so the actual scalar would be a different value to multiply the vector. In my mind, what should happen if you multiply the vector by the scalar is just gonna maintain its direction. It's just gonna be like further apart from the previous one. So you would determine the height of the arrow. But I'm not 100% sure if this is gonna work. So if it does work, then I'm gonna have to think about which one I think is better. Maybe I can create another variable and then make up an option to allow to decide what kind of value you want to use. So the main difference would be that if you multiply the position, then it maintains the arrow direction. So I think that one's more consistent, but the other one for the percentage is like easier to think about. So let me think about this. Oh yeah, the other thing that I have to do is I'm gonna create another variable there that is called directed, which is gonna be true by default. And then all that is gonna do is just remove the. So I'm gonna add another condition on the two different points there of the control flow, so that when the arrow is not directed, I just run the other circle. Because the nice thing about this is that if these conditions don't run, then it's gonna build the original arrow with the same positions. So I think it's gonna be easier to think about the final and because on the other one was annoying on when I did this on 3ds. It was annoying because you have to calculate the relative position. So I was doing the tube and then the arrow separately, and then the arrow can't go inside of the radius, and also the edge can't go inside of the radius. So you have to do some small calculations there to adjust the relative position of the arrow. And it was kind of annoying because of the way that you build the arrows. So it's still working. So now I'm gonna test the other stuff. So here, what I'm gonna do. The problem is the binormal and normal. Yeah, I guess this is an issue. So how do you get the binormal? But I guess if we multiply by the same scalar, it should be the same. So I'm gonna try that first. Actually, it can be just the position. Let me think about this. I'm not really sure because this one, the main difference is gonna be that I think it's better to put previous position because you have more control, I think. Because I think this one is gonna be. So now that I think about it, like if I do it the other way, oh no. um, So I'm gonna test if I do it the other way, just put the position here. Yeah, because now that I think about it, I don't need to do this. If I do the other way, I don't need to do this stuff. Because this position here is already gonna be. Is it or not? It's not because of the. It's gonna go with this one. So never mind. I think I do need to do it like this. So I'm contemplating whether or not I should use previous position here or just the position. I'm gonna use position. So I'm gonna use position first and see what happens. Because I think since the calculation is gonna be done based on this value here, it doesn't matter because it's gonna be at the end of the thing. But maybe I should do previous position because this one is on. Yeah, I think I should do previous position actually. Because it has to be based on this one. This is the last one that makes up the cylinder, so it makes more sense. Should be the same value. So this is gonna be equals to previous. I don't need the velocity. The 2 obviously is the size of the arrow. That's the problem. I think I need to. hmm. I need to have the previous velocity, I think, or the previous tangent. The previous velocity. No, now I'm not sure because it doesn't make sense to multiply the. I think if I multiply the normal and binormal by the plus 2 is gonna mess up the position. I should get the new normal and binormal by the other and just do a normal circle. So maybe I should start previous velocity here as well. Or previous tangent and then. Or I just passed previous normal. No, but then it's fucked up because it's not gonna be the same. Actually, let me test with just previous normal and binormal. Because I think it doesn't matter. Because the point is just to be like the same circle, let's say, the same plane, just on a different value. Yeah, so I'm gonna test this. It's gonna be arrow position. Just normal. Just minor. I think the position is the only thing that matters because the cylinders for making up the arrow should be on the same angle. Like the plane has to be on the same angle. So it doesn't matter. But actually it does matter. Maybe it does. I'm not sure. I think it doesn't matter because it doesn't matter because the radius is 0, so it's just gonna make this 0, so it doesn't matter. It's just the position that matters. Oh, the other thing you can do is just not even call this function. You can just push directly, now that I realize. Because the final point is just the point. So I don't need to call the function. Yeah, I think that's what I'm gonna do next time. So even on the other iteration, just push the points. You don't need the normal by normal. So I'm gonna test the previous one as well, just pushing the points, and then I comment everything out, just call the equation with the one, and then just push that point. So it does work, I think. Nice. It's off though. It's very off. Hmm. That's weird. But it might be because of the point thing. Like it's weird because I am getting the last point, so it should be the center of this one. But I don't understand why just multiplying by 2 is gonna. Yo, thank you, man. I don't know why multiplying by 2 decreases the size here. Because this one should be like it should be a straight line from like not a straight line, but keep the angle. It's just a scalar. Hmm. So obviously, so the first thing, what I'm gonna try is do the other way before, so I don't have to call the function, and then I know, but I pretty much know already that, yeah, but it might be better to call the function anyway because of the normals, and then I need the binormal normal. Like when I uncomment the other stuff, it might be better to call the function. But this would be 0, doesn't make sense. This stuff I got from ChatGPT, so I'm not. It's probably wrong anyway. Hmm. I'm gonna remove this because I think it's wrong. But I have to think about how to get the normal and binormal for the points. Or the normal. I think I only need the normal for the texture. The normal for the lighting. Normal is the most important, I think. And you have the UV as well, but the UV I'm not sure if it's probably not the same thing. Oh, UV is probably for texture coordinates. Yeah, texture UV mapping. So UV is for texture coordinates. So 3GS has some calculations for UV. It's kind of hard to think about. I think mainly I need the tangent. But the thing is that the tangent for the curve is not necessarily the same for the normal and binormal. It might be actually. I think it probably is though. Because it's just perpendicular. So obviously it's like the finite frame, so it's all coordinate system. So I think that it doesn't matter because like on the cylinder it's just creating the radius based on the plane that's perpendicular to the tangent. So all the vertices from that circle should have the same tangent because it's the same direction. No, it's slightly different, like because it's the same tangent, but then it's gonna be adjusted based on the points. I don't know if we can use the position of the points as the tangent, position of each point. I don't know if it's the same thing. It seems to be the same thing based on the equation here. Just multiplying so like this multiplication here rotates the points based on sine or cosine, which is based on the segments. So we're going 360 based on the amount of segments you have here. The v is the interval. So sine or cosine is just rotating the points. Then multiplying by the radius, which gives the magnitude of the circle. So in my mind, the calculation for the tangent should be basically the same thing, because you're just transferring the tangent from the center of the curve to the surface. It should be the vertex here. So I'm not really sure if the vertex encodes the tangent. So if it does encode, then I can get the same way there. Because the tangent is just going to be the same calculation, I think. It's just the cross product of the tangent. Yeah, so I think I'm going to do that. Because it probably doesn't change anything now. I'm just getting the perpendicular up 1 point normal, actually. And I'm considering that the vertex point is going to be the tangent. But this is, I'm not 100% sure, because it's kind of hard to think about, because vector 3 is just a position. So how do you think about the vector just having one position? Because the vector is just a difference between an actual vector that measures the direction is a difference between two different points. So maybe, yeah, I think if I decrease this position from the original one, it just gets it should get the normal, actually. So actually the normal should be the difference between point position and vertex, because it is perpendicular. Like it gets the direction of the radius, but then it would be the inside of that. So how do we transfer to the surface? So we multiply by the circle radius. So is the difference? I think I understand now. I'm not 100% sure if it works like this, but I think probably does. This vertex minus point position. Then you normalize this. To get the magnitude. So you're just basically getting the direction from the center of the circle to the surface. Just the difference between the two points. Final point and the center point. And when you get to the... So this would be the direction from the center. So you just multiply this by the radius. But it makes sense if the 0 is just going to be the point. No, that wouldn't make sense, because... So what I can do is... I think if I multiply by the radius doesn't make sense, because you're just changing the scalar of the vector. So maybe I do the other way around and then multiply by -1 to change the direction. So from the center to the... I think probably that's... So the question that I have now is, I'm probably going to research this later. It's just translating, right? So it's just, you would add the circle. So I think it's not multiplying, it's adding. Because you're translating to the point. So I think this one works if you add. So like this, up until this point, you get the direction from the center of the circle that encodes the normal because it's just the vector that is the difference between them. And then you transfer that to the surface by increasing the radius. And obviously, if the radius is zero, then the normal is just going to be at the point, which is the last case. So just on the point, and just but then that case would be the same. But I think that case doesn't matter that much as well because, or maybe it does actually, because the points where lighting, because confusing is on when you have connections of two different faces, because then depending on the angle of each face, is going to change the direction of the light that is supposed to create the reflection. So I'm not really sure when you have a point if this calculation is correct because the the distance would be the same, so this would be 0. Doesn't make sense. But if I do it the other way around, it also doesn't make sense. Like if I decrease the vertex from the point position and then I multiply by -1 to get the sign, I think it does make sense. But if the circle radius is 0, then it's just multiplying. It's getting the cross product of the points with the vector. So like it would be like this. No, it's vertex cross. Maybe it is just like this. Yeah, I think that it is probably just like this. I'm overcomplicating this. Because that's how you calculate the normal and the tangent there. So I think it's just like this. So I'm gonna test just like this. Just the perpendicular. You do the cross product, you get the angle. And then you normalize probably. Do I normalize here? Oh, I don't normalize because the tangent's already normalized. But here I think I have to normalize. All this stuff. And the UV, I'm not sure how to do it. Normalized. So since if this does work, like I have to see. I do have to. It's better to call the function because I'm gonna have to add as many times as this. So I think it does make sense to call the function. I'm not gonna think about removing. So let me think about this. So the next thing to try is to. So let me test to see if this is gonna break anything. So if it doesn't break anything, next thing to try is to change the position here. So or change the normal. So I'm gonna use this the normal, the current normal and binormal. But the thing is, like, it's gonna be based on the curve. So I think if I use that, then it's not gonna work. The issue is figuring out the normal and binormal for the final points. So I guess I can do so to figure out I can just do the cross product directly on the final thing here. I think that's what I'm gonna do. So get the arrow position. Yeah, the problem is that the position is not. Yeah, I think it doesn't matter because yeah, because if we do the cross product, it's just gonna be the parallel. So I get the position, I do the cross product with the vector, this vector here. I'm gonna consider that as a normal. And now that I think about it, I can try this on the other stuff as well. Because maybe I don't even need the velocity. But I just got the position. The problem is that position. I think the velocity is better because the velocity encodes the direction better than the position does. Because the position is just the points. It doesn't take into account the curvature. So this is the issue. So I'm gonna try with the last position here instead of getting the previous one. But I think it's not gonna work. Either way, it doesn't matter that much because as long as if the arrow size is small, and also is like macro optimization, so I don't think it matters that much. I think it's like kind of like worrying about writing typos when you're writing a book. Like, to a certain extent, it matters, but like nobody's gonna care that much about the if I have one typo or two typos on the book, as long as the book is good. So the weird thing is that if I put the normal, I don't see why. I guess it's because the like scaling of the position is not taken into consideration. So maybe instead of I can put the velocity here because of the or tangents actually. Yeah, now that I think about it, this might solve that. Because of the thing that I just said, the position doesn't code the direction of the curve. But the tangent, the velocity normalized should. Because the plane is being built based on this tangent. So I make the tangent. I'm just gonna put position because I'll be right back. Hmm. I should start the previous. The problem is that I'm using a different tangent. So I'm gonna start the previous tangents there. Because it's gonna be the same shape because I'm getting the tangent from the last point. And not the one from the same plane. Maybe not. Interesting. Hmm. Actually, for the point, it doesn't matter. Yeah. It's weird that this tangent seems to be. It's because it's normalized. That's why. But even then, it's kind of confusing. Shouldn't be. So what I'm gonna do is just start the previous. Just see what happens. No, I'm not gonna do normalize. Just see. I don't see why by making the previous position and then just multiplying y isn't. Oh, it's probably not because I have to add, not multiply. Yeah, I'm gonna try adding and see what happens. So I'm gonna try this one first, then try adding and see what happens. So I'm gonna make the arrow position equal to the previous position. The problem is that I'm not really sure if it's gonna take, if I add, it's gonna take into the in consideration the direction of the point. I think it's not because it's just gonna. Yeah, this is the issue, is because it depends on the. If I multiply or if I increase, it depends on the values of the tree. It doesn't take into consideration the direction of the curve. That's the problem. I think it has to be something to do with the tangent, probably. Because. But even the tangent. Because the thing is, I don't think 1 point is enough. That's the issue. So maybe I have to. The problem is if I decrease the current one is not supposed to be. It's already gonna take into consideration the part that it should. Maybe not. And the other problem with doing like this is that it does change the distance, I think. Like making based on the final position with the one is a lot. The problem is that you can't think if you do like this, you can't encode the rotation because yeah, this is actually like a lot more complicated if I do like this. Because if I do it based on the size, then like it's not gonna the curve is not gonna go from 0 to 1 like it's supposed to. It's gonna go from 0 until the point that the arrow is at, and then it's gonna complete with the arrow size, and it's gonna be in a different location. So this is the issue. So yeah, probably the easiest thing to do is just to put, because the thing is, if I do it the same way that I was doing, where I do the final position based on the points when t equals 1, then there isn't a way to encode the inclination of the only way is just decreasing the size of the arrow. So as the arrow gets bigger, it's gonna become more. It is gonna look less like a cylinder. But I think that doesn't matter that much. Problem is that direction requires 2 points, I think. I need 3 points minimum. So like the problem is that I can't use the final points. Maybe I can actually. I'm gonna try like that. But I'm not sure if this is very good. Because like the current position when this hits here, like this position here, shouldn't be parts of the thing. And maybe it should actually, because it's the last one, so it's gonna be. It would be the final position if all of them worked with this segment here. Because this is the thing, I think this position is not like, it has to be the same from the previous one. So like I would have to need this previous and the previous from the previous to subtract one from the other to get the direct vector that represents the direction. Then multiply that by the scalar. and this doesn't solve the size thing like I said before. So even if I get the direction right and I do the size, it's gonna be very difficult to calculate from the outside of the class. Should make sense of the positions because it's always gonna be different. Like I'm making the equation for the curve based on the start and end. Yeah, now I have to adjust somehow because it wouldn't be in the same space. So I think it's probably not worth to think about this. I think the easiest thing to do is just do based on the way that I'm doing here and just decrease the size of the arrow. So decrease the size of the arrow by default, and then if you want to have a weird arrow, you just increase the size. Because then it becomes a lot easier to think about everything. And just based on Occam's razor, I think that this makes a lot more sense. I'm not gonna try this. So last thing for curiosity that I'm gonna do is just do this stuff that I was talking about. So I'm gonna comment this down. It should be a limit, I think. Like because the size of the arrow is regardless of how many segments you have is always the same. The only thing that changes is the resolution of the rest of the curve. So there should be a limit where the position of the arrow starts to deviate from a cylinder because of the direction. So maybe one thing that I can do is calculate that and whatever. But I think it's probably not worth it. Just stats there, mainly. Actually, it might be better, but then it's too complicated. Because the thing that I'm thinking about now is that usually the way that you're gonna think about it is that like this, the geometry of the arrow is gonna be a cylinder, so the size of the cylinder is not gonna be affected by the shape of the curve. So you can make the arrow as big as you want or as small as you want, and it still works because the position from the beginning and the end is determined from outside of the class. But based on the way that I'm doing, there's always gonna be this limit on the size of the arrow. So after a certain point, it's gonna start being curved because the arrow is following the path of the curve. So the cylinder, the shape of the cylinder is determined by the amount of segments that it takes, to the percentage of the segments. So like it might be worth it to, if I don't want to make it based on that, then I just figure out a way to get the direction of the last point and then make the arrow size that. But then I have to think about how to structure the class from outside. Like if I have like passing the beginning and the end, I need to put some extra logic inside of the class that takes the beginning and the end and then recalculates the size that would keep the arrow, let's say, in the same direction, and then adjust or get a new equation, I think. Like get new points based on the beginning and end. It sounds like very complicated. Maybe there's an easier way to think about this. So the question is like how, using the Bezier curve equation to calculate the distance, how do you manage based on the arrow size to recalculate the final and end position? So if you have a final end position that is passed through the class, and that has to be maintained, and you need to take the arrow size into consideration, it becomes a very hard problem, I think, because you need to think about the angle of the curve. There's an infinite amount of angles that the curve can get to the final points, and you need to maintain the integrity, let's say, of the arrow. So depending on the size of the arrow, it's going to change the beginning and final point you use to build the Bezier curve equation, I think, if you do the arrow outside of the curve. But maybe it's not that hard, actually. Like, yeah, but then it is kind of hard. One thing, yeah, one thing you can do is take the final points and decrease the size of the arrow, and that becomes the new final point. And then from that, you get the tangent of that point. Maybe that works, actually. You build build the equation from that point. The thing is, I was trying to do like this before, I think, where I was doing outside of the thing here, but for some reason it wasn't working. So maybe I should try that again, because that would be easier as well. So you think about the things in a different way. So like everything that is inside of the thing, the loop gets is used on the curve, and then you just get the final position. I'm gonna try this as well. Like the reason why I'm doing like this now is because I think I'm pretty sure I tried the other way where I generate the circles outside, and for some reason it didn't work. So, but I think it's worth trying this. So, if it does work, it becomes a lot easier. So, like you create a variable outside of here, could be these ones. And then you just make the curve based on the iteration. And then for the final position, so you do the thing that I said. So let's say from outside of the class, you pass 0, 0, 0 through 0, 100, 100. And then the size of the arrow is like 20. You decrease, so the positions used for the curve would be like 0, 80, 80. Then you build the curve from this equation, and then outside you generate two different circles based on the spread here between the two, getting the final position that was built from the curve. But you would have an angle like this. That's a problem. Because the size of the curve has to go. Yeah, I think it's still an issue either way. Because the shape of the curve has to be determined by the integrity of the arrow. So yeah, I think it's still gonna be an issue if you do like this. You would have to calculate the inclination, so the distance, but that's can't do it like this. It does make me think though. How is it possible? How does it work on the other things? No, but if you make the final point should be the base of the arrow, then I think it does stick. I have to rotate the, but even rotating the plane is kind of weird. No, but if I rotate the plane, maybe it does work because, yeah, so on the previous one, I have to rotate the plane instead of using the same to take into consideration the final point. That's how it works. Oh, but that doesn't make sense because this one has to be on the same on the final point of the curve. Yeah, it's very confusing. It's still going to be the same thing. I'm just curious, just say. Like the inclination of the last cylinder that is still part of the curve has to be congruent with the angle from the distance, from the final distance. If you do it without the arrow, then it becomes very easy, obviously, because you just put the points. So it's gonna have the same thing because it's gonna get to that point. But if you add the arrow, then it becomes harder. Because the base of the arrow has to be on the same, it should be facing on the same inclination of the final point. The problem is that I'm building the last cylinder using the other one, and like the issue is the indices, I think, because I'm building them in the same thing. So like if I had the cylinder as a separate thing, then it's a lot easier because you can do the Bezier curve from the base of the cylinder to the beginning point, and then you build the base of the cylinder separately. But if I'm building the cylinder with the same logic that I'm using to build the thing, then it's different. But it all comes down to the angle of the final plane. And the problem is like the angle has to take into consideration the rest of the curve. That's the confusing thing. I'm gonna just do the Asus thing. It's not worth thinking about this too much. So, test to see if this works. If this works, then what I'm gonna do is just remove, like I said before. I'm gonna try to remove these conditions from the thing because it's easier to think about. And then just do it them at the end there. So generate the circle first by calling the previous and normal. Yeah, I'm not gonna need. Or maybe I do need. So I'm gonna test both ways. So first testing the position. Maybe it wasn't working because you need to stop creating the segments before. Yeah. Alright. One thing that I can do is just to put -2 there on the loops so that it doesn't go all the way. Yeah, so I'm gonna test that first. This is still very big. First thing I'm gonna do is move this stuff. So what I'm thinking about doing is just decreasing by 2 here if this doesn't work. Because obviously it's gonna run more times now. So if this works like this, then I'm gonna test to see if I just get a position here instead of the previous position. If it works. And then if that works, I'm just gonna change the value there. Change the size of the arrow. Maybe this is better because it runs all the segments that it has to run. Or the curve. Yeah, so this would be like the true size, I think. It's probably better. Because the other, I'm removing like 2 segments of iterations. Yeah, I think I have to keep the previous position because the other circle should be on the same spots as the last one. Maybe not actually. If I do it this way, then it makes more sense because the previous one would be the position. I think I do have to remove there. I'm just gonna create another. Yeah, it's gonna be a weird thing if it works. It's gonna be inside of the arrow. So this is the thing. It's not working now. That's the thing that is confusing. So I do remember, so pretty sure I tested like this before. And it didn't create anything. Which is really weird. So I'm gonna test with the position. But this is the same thing. It's using the last position. Hmm. So why doesn't this way work? Doesn't make any sense. Like it's basically the same thing that I'm doing. This is the thing that is weird. But it might be because of the segments. So I'm gonna decrease by 2 this. See what happens. It might be because of the segments. Because just generating the points in the same spots. I need to reserve. I think it's probably because of the segments. I need to reserve 2 segments for the arrow. What I'm gonna do. The amount of times you call generate circle here should be. I think this probably is gonna work. The amount of times you call generate circle outside the loop has should be the same. Has should be decreased from the amount of times you run the loop. So that's when it generates the indices, is the same number. And it doesn't make sense to increase on the indices, I think, because of the spreads you're getting. I scourged. The thing that is kind of confusing to think about is the relationship between the segments and the size of the segments that I'm using here. This is the thing that is kind of confusing me. Because the segments just the number, the amount of segments you have. But then here is going to be the spread for each segment, which is based on the arrow size. So it's a percentage of the arrow size. It goes from 1 as well. So if this doesn't, so this would be 1 divided by the curve segments. I'm not really sure if this makes sense. It is like a percentage dividing here. So maybe this is incorrect. Should be just multiplying by the arrow size. Because this is already a percentage. It's went from 0 to the whole thing based on the segments. No, I think it doesn't make sense, should be. Yeah, I think it's gonna be I minus arrow size. But it's basically the same thing. It's just like a simplified version. Because I minus arrow size is the same as doing 1 minus arrow size multiplied by the thing. So I think this is easier to understand probably. Nice, I think it did work. So this was the problem I was having last time. So the reason why it wasn't working last time is that I was increasing the segments on the indices function instead of decreasing on the other thing. So I think the reason why it doesn't work when you do like that is because of the segments, the size of the segments. So like the last points, the last circles that it generates is gonna be with a fucked up position. Because you're reaching the limit, I think. Well, I'm not really sure though if that makes sense. Like what happens when you do, you're just gonna be like 1%, so it's kind of weird. Like when this is equal to curve segments, it's just gonna be 1 here. When I is equal to the curve segments. Should be at the end of the... I like it. I do think it makes more sense should be... But I think it fucks up because of the indices. This is the issue. Let me try and see the other way around first. Because I do remember trying this and increasing the indices by 2, but it didn't work. So I'll try again, see. Because maybe it was something else that was off. So that's basically what I did here. So I'm adding the amount of iterations here, which is gonna be the indices to represent the additional circles we put outside of this loop here. Because I do think it makes more sense to go all the way to curve segments so it reaches 1 here at the final iteration. It generates the circle at the last position that is supposed to be the proportion that is related to the curve and not to the arrow based on the arrow size. I never. So someone saying I'm still stuck on Pascal when I learn C++. I never learned Pascal or read anything about it. I'm not sure if it's easier or more difficult than C++. Definitely easier. I don't remember really if C++ is hard because I don't remember what it's like anymore. True. Like I started learning a long time ago. So imagine, like for someone that doesn't know anything about programming, it's probably hard. But for someone that knows other languages, it's probably not gonna be that hard. Also, it does work now. So I'm not really. I was probably doing something else wrong, and now it has the direction as well. So I guess the issue, the inclination was just that. Is when I was doing inside of the circle. It might be the spread as well. I think. Nice. So let me increase the size of the arrow and see what happens. See if it's gonna keep the inclination. But C++ shouldn't be that hard for you, man. If you know other programming languages and you're familiar with the basic data types, it's mostly just the same thing. Like there are some very annoying things to learn. Um, like the most difficult things to learn is right hand side and left hand side rules, which comes into like type deduction of type for points. So like points in general and the right hand side, left hand side rules for deducing point types. Though that's and also the other parts that are very confusing is when it comes to that to templates combined with class inheritance. But usually from the stuff that I'm seeing here on Godot, there isn't a lot of like these most complicated concepts are not used here for the most part. Might be in some third libraries that they use, but like from their code directly, and also like from everything that I've been doing here, most of the stuff is abstracted away anyway because they created the classes, so you just use the abstraction that they created. But obviously, it's better to know how they do things here. But from what I've seen, it's not that hard actually to understand. But I might be biased because now, like, it's like one of those things that after you learn everything, then like looking back at it, it seems easier than it is. Because I do remember struggled a lot to learn when I was in the very beginning when I was learning. And I also watched hundreds of videos on C++. So, but I do think that there is an element, just like with anything else, that people make it sound that like harder than it actually is. I think it's just a tendency that everyone has for everything, not just programming, like everything, engineering and everything else. In general, people make it sound harder than it actually is. Yeah, nice man. Also think that C is probably harder than C++ to actually learn from the beginning without using anything, because you have less tools to create stuff. So C, you have to think about the like how to build everything, the memory. It's more annoying. It's not. It still has the inclination here, so it's just the side of the arrow. But I'm gonna leave it like this. It doesn't matter that much. Next thing I'm gonna try to figure out is the material thing. So I'm gonna figure out the material now and just decrease the size of the arrow until, because I think this stuff is not worth to spend a bunch of time thinking about. It's gonna be super complicated to adjust the final thing there to get the direction of the arrow in the correct way, and then just keep in mind the size and everything else. So it's not worth it, the time invested, I think. So I'm just gonna do a small value here, see. This is actually not a game, it's a game engine. It's called Godot. Not sure if you know. Or you just I'm creating a new class for Godot that is an arrow in 3 dimensions, because Godot doesn't have a arrow in 3D, they have arrows in 2D. Yeah, so I think Godot was mostly designed for 2D, and then like recently, I don't know how long, they have been building stuff for 3D, so it doesn't have a lot of things. But it's still overall very good, I think. I heard people complain about the physics, that is not very good, but there is a external library or module or whatever called Jolt, I think, Jolt Physics. I think it's maybe an extension of Godot or whatever that allows you to have physics. But I'm mainly trying to create a graph on 3 dimensions. So basically, I'm trying to transfer SoftVis stuff I did on the 3D, with 3GS on the front end to Godot, and then I'm gonna play around and see like what can I build with this, which I still don't know for sure. But trying to transfer this stuff here to Godot. Once I get to the points, I'm gonna figure out what to do. It's still very messed up. It might be because of the size of the. It's better, but it's still very messed up. Might be because of the size of the radios as well. I'm gonna decrease the size of the radios. And I'm going to put 0.2 here. I'm gonna do. Sure. It looks very small, it should be 0. So like 2% of the thing should be the size of the arrow. Or maybe even makes sense. So I'm gonna just leave like this and whatever. So I wonder if there's a way to put a limit on the value. But I think just with the condition there that I did, it doesn't matter, because if it is 0 or lower, it's just gonna be the curve. So and if it is very big, then I guess I should put a condition to see to check if it's 1. Yeah, I forgot. So I'm gonna see what happens if I'm gonna test to see if I put a value either. If it's 1, actually, it's gonna be 0 there. Just interesting. So I'm gonna test to see what happens if it's 1. But all I have to do is just change the conditions here, so I make sure that the arrow size always between 0 and 1. But I'm curious to see what's gonna happen if it is 1, because it's gonna be 0, the curved segments. So I guess it's just gonna be like a point. It's not gonna show anything, I think. Because then it's the whole curve. And if it's greater, then it's just gonna be on the like reverse. If it's greater than 1. Yeah, so I guess I could just put the range there on the check. On the ternary, put the range. So if it goes beyond or below, then I just do the curve, normal curve. Maybe I should do just the. Maybe it doesn't matter actually, because if it's greater than 1, it's just gonna be like a bunch of cylinders in the beginning position, I think, and then you're just gonna connect to the end of the curve. So I think this is fine, and maybe it should be bigger still. I think this color is kind of weird. It's like I'm not really sure. Maybe it's because of the thickness of the tube. Should be the same as I have there. So I think that's the proportion should be a little bit bigger. So I'm gonna change the proportion. I should put 0.4. Puts 3. That's 2.5. I'm gonna test to see. Actually, I'm testing to see what happens if it's 1 first. But after I get to default values that seem to be reasonable, should be like the same shape as the arrow that I had there on 3GS, I'm just gonna figure out the spatial material thing so that it doesn't do, so that it does do backface culling. Then once I get to that point, I'm gonna test. I think the color there. I think the color is coming from the edge because I'm displaying this array mesh as part of the graph edge 3D, and then on the graph edge on the graph edge 3D, I'm overriding the material, so that's why the color is below there. But I think after I figure out the default values here, it should be done for the arrow. Then I don't have. Well, the other thing that I have to think about is I'm gonna have to do the first circle there. Because I need to figure out how to fill the bottom, the base. But honestly, I think I'm not gonna think about this now. Maybe it is worth it to think about it actually. Like to close the beginning of the curve so it's not a. So what I have to do is just put the points and then just generate a cylinder in the beginning and then increase the amount of iterations. Yeah, the thing that. This is what I was trying to do here, I think. Well, I erased there, but I had the start position there. Hmm. But I think the start position is always going to be 0. And then I can just call the functions again with the segment as 0, because starting from 0 here. So I can do it at the end, because the problem is the indices. So here, this is the issue, because the values here are going to be based on the segments. So I think it makes more sense to create the whole thing first, so I don't have to think about how to readjust these values here. And then after this, after I create the curve indices, then I generate another circle that is going to be at the base. So I just call the function again with 0 as the value here. And then I just create another function to create the indices that are going to create the connections of the cylinder at the base. I can just copy from the other class. So I'm gonna do that before I do everything else, because then I think it makes more sense. And I'm just gonna make it based on a variable that's gonna be true by default. But I think for my case, it doesn't matter, because you're not gonna see the base of the arrow anyway, or the edge anyway, because it's gonna be connecting to different spheres. So, but I do think it's better to structure this before I do anything else, because then if I encounter problems, it's gonna be better. So it doesn't do anything, it just gets a long ass arrow. Just fine. So I think it doesn't matter if I leave it like this. I'm gonna test to see what's gonna happen. I think if we increase beyond 1, it's just gonna change the direction, but it's gonna be basically the same thing. So I don't think I need to put the condition there. As long as it doesn't break, it doesn't matter. I'm gonna put, let's say 5. And put reasonable default values. Then after that, figure out the material. The annoying thing is the warnings there that I'm getting because of the default values of the GraphEdge 3D. Because I'm initializing everything on the constructor. Maybe it could be a warning because... Oh no, I am initializing here. So I think the only thing I'm gonna have to do is change this thing here. So instead of standard material, just put spatial material here. I'm gonna remove this stuff here. This is the great thing about doing like this. It becomes a lot easier, I think, in my mind. Because everything is just compacted on the same class, and then it's basically based on the Boolean variables that you can easily change. Instead of creating a bunch of different classes where I have to set a bunch of classes and then think about the class. But obviously, I'm probably losing a lot of power because the classes are going to have additional functionality that takes into consideration, like other stuff. But I think this trade-off for me makes a lot more sense. Just simplify everything and just make based on the flag variables. I think before I do the material, I'm going to do the flag variables. Yeah, so this is what I imagine. It just changes which doesn't matter that much to me. Interesting. I think it's doing like this because it changes the curve. I think the problem is that it might be better to put the range, because what's happening is that the I is going beyond 1, and this fucks up the equation of the curve, because it should be between 0 and 1, the t. or the way that it works on the cubic Bezier equation, the segment should be, the t should be between 0 and 1 because it's a linear interpolation. So this value should be between 0 and 1, should not fuck up this one. Then it changes the points here. So I'm gonna put a condition to check. So I'm just gonna put like this. So this should make it so that if the arrow size, I guess, yeah, if it's equal, yeah, so this should be. So if it's between the interval, then it's just going to be based on the equation here. And if it goes beyond 1, it's going to use the standard, which is just going to create a curve without the arrow. Actually, it might be, so it might be worth it to put if else statements and then make it so that if the size is greater than 1, I just make the arrow equals 1. Yeah, I think that's probably better. Yeah, I think that's probably better. So next time what I'm gonna do, so I'm gonna remove stuff that I did here. And just put a condition here. Yeah, I think this is probably better. Because then, like, if I do it the other way, it doesn't make sense. Like, once you go beyond the 1 creates the original curve, it makes more sense that any value beyond 1 that's bigger than 1 is just gonna generate the arrow because that's the limit for the size there. So I think this makes more sense. And then I don't need to break this ternary into other stuff. So if the arrow size is greater than 0, it uses this formula. And it should go the maximum to 1. Which makes this 0, which creates this arrow there. So this is probably gonna work. So I'm gonna put the other default values there. And then I'm gonna create a Boolean variable called directed on the yeah, I think it does make sense to put on the arrow mesh because then I just pass down from the graph edge 3D. Because the arrow mesh is the one that creates the geometry, so it needs to have a Boolean variable. It doesn't make sense for me to only set on the graph edge 3D. I think it makes sense to put on the arrow mesh and then I pass from the graph edge 3D. Both of them need to have that. Interesting. I think it's because of the condition though. Yeah, because now I'm messing up the thing. Oh, I don't understand why this is happening. Hmm. So maybe I have to do the 3 or the control flow outside of the ternary. I can do obviously two ternaries concatenated, but that's get confusing. It makes more sense to put. So let me think about if it's greater than 1. It's just gonna be 0. So I can do it here. Maybe greater or equal. Square. I think this one is gonna work. Now that I think about it, it's probably worth it to break down the ternary because of the directed value. Actually, it's probably better to like I do the ternary outside, so if if it's directed, then I just do the normal thing outside. Just generate through different circles based on this stuff. And if it's not directed, then I just generate two circles again, just the same way that I was doing on the loop here. It might be easier than to put a condition here inside of the loop because of the amount of iterations that I need. But it's maybe not because it has to be dependent on the thing. This might be more annoying to think about it. Because it depends on the arrow size. This is the issue. But I think I'm gonna stop here because I'm kind of tired already. When I eat something and think about this offstream. Yeah, so now it works. So I think this way, I'm gonna leave it like this, so it doesn't matter. So I'm gonna leave it like this, put default values, that makes sense there. So what I'm thinking about now is that I'm gonna put a flag variable. I can put. Oh. It's gonna be equal to true by default. And I'm thinking about what place should put this variable at. So I was thinking about putting outside, but it might be like I have to take this into consideration here, I think. So I think I need to put here. So I'm gonna put an end here. And directed. I need to do both, I think. So I put here. So if it's greater than 0 and directed, then I go here. Maybe it makes more sense to put the directed first. Because if it's false, then it doesn't make sense. So if it's false, it just creates the curve normally, and then I need to put. This is the problem. So maybe I do. But if I do. a loop's kind of annoying. I think I just do like a condition. So the question is, how do I get the last? Because if it's not directed, then I need to just continue the segments in the same ratio that I was doing here. Well, let me think about it. It's not directed. Because this is gonna be, yeah, this. Oh. Because now I'm not, I have to think about, I'm gonna put false there to see. Because the way that I'm doing this, the position is gonna, the final and end points of the position is gonna depend on the arrow. Because like I'm making sure that the final position of the whole thing is based on the arrow here, because this is gonna be 1. But the last position from the 1, like the spread, is determined by the size of the arrow based on the calculation here. So when I don't have this, so when I'm doing based on this, is it still? But I do think, yeah, it is going through 1, I think. Yeah, but it becomes a problem, I think, because the amount of segments I need is the issue. So I think that I have to put a condition on the indices. So I think that if it is not directed, so if this condition is false, then this should generate from 0 to 1. Because just doing based on their curved segments. So this whole thing should generate. I'm getting tired. That's the problem here. So it's kind of hard to think about. Because now I'm thinking about like if arrow size is 0, then it's going through this one, but then it's still generating here, which is kind of weird. It's like it would be the same thing as this. So it's still generating the segments from 0 to 1, but then I'm creating the arrow. But no, actually it's gonna be, yeah, so it is kind of weird. So I'm gonna put 0 for the arrow and see what happens. I don't think I tested to see what happens with the 0 there. I think it's just gonna create like a, it's not gonna create the, it's just gonna create the last thing with the radius that is bigger. So I guess I can just copy it's not that big of a deal. So I put the same condition that I put on the ternary here, outside of here. Yeah, that's the easiest thing. So it only builds these things if it doesn't build if it builds the arrow. So it's based on the same condition, and then I put the same condition inside of the indices, true? Because obviously, if I'm not generating here, this true, it needs to reflect on the indices. So I think it's not that hard. Whatever condition I put here to check to see if I'm gonna use the formula for the arrow is the same condition I put to check to see if I'm gonna build these 2 extra circles. Because if I don't build the arrow, then I'm already building the whole path from the beginning to the end based on this formula here. So like the last segment, if I'm following this formula, the curved segment should be 1 at the end because it's equal to the segment here. So it's going to be I, which is equal to the segments divided by. Maybe I actually should put just minus or less than instead of less than equal. No, less than equal, I think is the correct one. Because the last iteration should be, I should be the equal to the segments. Or maybe it should be greater than because I'm not 100% sure if it's gonna run when I is equal to the segments. But I think it does run because I was putting the condition there before and it was working. So I think this is the way it should work. So if this condition is not, if this doesn't run, then it means that the last position that is created here for the whole curve is going to be the same position that you would create from this. So I don't need to check anything. Yeah, I think this should work. So I'm going to see what happens there. And I'm going to put the same condition. Yeah, it's just like what I imagined. So it just creates a bigger cylinder at the end there, because it's creating on the same spot and not creating the last one. So now all I have to do is put the condition here. And then I put here as well. Let me see. Does it make sense? Yeah, I think it does make sense. So here, let's forget this. So this should work, I think. If it's directed and has things, then plus 2 for the arrow. Else, it just takes the curve segments. I think the positions are always the same because of the formula that I'm using inside of the loop to calculate the length of each segment. It basically takes a percentage out of the thing. And then just, yeah. So I think that this is correct, probably. Yeah, I'm not gonna figure out the material today, but it shouldn't be that hard, I think. Maybe I'll figure out off stream. Just change from standard material to spatial material there, and then I think you change a flag variable. That's all you have to do. So when you change the flag variable, then Godot is gonna render both front and back, and that should solve the problem that is disappearing, like some triangles. If that doesn't work, then it's gonna be very hard, I think. But I'm not gonna care about this too much. As long as the shape of the arrow is fine, I think it doesn't matter that much. It's still hard to see anyway, whether or not the as long as the arrow is visible, like you can see that it's clear that the direction is going from one point to the other. I think the details don't matter that much for what I'm trying to achieve. Doesn't work. Hmm. Oh, it's because they're so it does work. I think it's because the arrow is zero there, so I'm gonna change the one. Damn, I'm getting tired already. 0.4. Hey man, someone's saying to make stuff for Unity. So I don't think it makes sense for me right now, man, to do that. Like because I already it wouldn't make sense for me to learn a whole new framework just to do because my main goal here is not to do uh, I do wanna I do want to get people to watch what I'm doing and to build an audience, but that's not my highest value, let's say. Like my highest value is become good at programming. So like I think it makes more sense for me now to build stuff with Godot because Godot's I think probably I haven't studied too much, but I think it's most likely that Unreal Engine and Unity are better than Godot. They have a lot more stuff because they probably have a lot more funding as well. So I do think that they have more stuff, but Godot is more like I'm gonna learn a lot more by using Godot, and I already spent a bunch of time understanding Godot. So I think it's much better for me at the position that I am now to just build with what I have and what I learned from Godot and start making stuff because otherwise I'm just gonna be trapped on a loop of constantly studying the frameworks. So it makes a lot more sense to build on Godot. And also the thing that I don't like about Unity is that as far as I understand, they use C#, and I wanna use either C or C++. So I did think about using Unreal as well, but both Unreal and Unity, they are not full open source as well. So I think for my case, it just makes more sense to focus on Godot now. But I don't know, at some point I might start studying Unity and Unreal. I'm probably gonna study everything at some point. But I think for the near and medium term, it doesn't make sense to me. It just makes more sense to just focus all my attention on Godot, and then and I'm having fun as well. Like it's very interesting to like build stuff from scratch, and like I have this direction that I kind of want to go, and I'm curious about. So building stuff for Godot, like things that are related to material science, or like building materials using meshes, building procedural mesh, and studying this kind of stuff, and also building applications. But I don't, like I said, like before, I don't, at least for now, because obviously I do understand that like these kinds of things have an impact because of money. So like, but like because I'm not working for any of these companies, like I'm independent, I'm doing my own thing. It doesn't make sense for me to I try not my best to not look at those. And I think that's a very common thing that people do that is understandable, obviously. So like it's not that big of a deal to me either that people talk about languages and frameworks because people have to work with these technologies and then they feel the pain of working with them, and then it makes them complain about it, like TypeScript and all this kind of stuff. So it does make sense from that point, but it's the more you think like that, it traps you into the thing because. But that's easy for me to say because I'm doing my own thing. So yeah. So I do think it makes sense for people to talk like that, but like it doesn't make sense from a bigger picture to be attached to any technology because the technology should always be a means to an end and not the end itself. So you should always be looking to understand the fundamental principles behind the technologies so that you don't become a slave to either a company or a technology, because the companies and technologies will always change, but the fundamental principles are unlikely to change. Like it's based on the laws of physics, which is like has more objectivity, has more density on reality. But even the laws of physics themselves and science, you can never trust anything 100% fully, because it's always the case that you can be wrong about everything you know, because that's the nature of reality, is a paradox. So you should always be careful with being 100% certain about something, because everything you know is a consequence of the state of the present. So you create the connection of past and future in the present. So you always have underlying assumptions about what you know. So I think that's why the state that makes the most sense is one of curiosity and exploration, where you're always trying to increase our understanding of fundamental principles and detaching ourselves from all this superficial stuff. And the reason why a lot of people don't want to do this is because it takes a lot of energy to do this. So it's just Occam's razor. So people get into tribe mentality and they attach themselves with technology or tool because their ego wants to maximize energy. So if you're constantly having to change the way you think, and it's gonna take a lot more energy for you, and it's a lot harder. So the tendency for everybody, just because of a gravitational force, is to try to stay on the paradigm that they know. Especially if, like, the more time you invested in something, and the more dangerous it becomes. So when there's something that threatens that, your natural response is going to be to trying to prevent that from happening, because it costs a lot less energy to keep what I already have than to try something new. So it's like a survival mechanism. It's your ego trying to survive. And that's why people create these tribes. So it's like a function of energy. That's how social structures are formed. This is like Occam's razor. And the way that technology is going to evolve is going to be based on convergence and divergence between normal probabilistic distributions, which are Gaussian curves, and exponential distributions, which are Pareto distributions, which is basically what money is built on top of. So it's like this fluctuation of frequencies of the genetic mutation, which follows, in most cases, a Gaussian distribution, and Pareto distribution, which is the way that groups relate, which is a consequence of Occam's razor. So that generates an endless transformation, which is a computation of the collective consciousness, which creates technology that shapes the environment. So throughout these cycles, you're always going to have this paradox between trying to maximize your energy so you don't waste time on a bunch of stuff that is useless, but at the same time being aware to not fall into the trap of believing in retirement, because that's an illusion that is sold to you to make it easier to enslave you. And also for brands and stuff like that, like the worst kind of consumer is a critical thinker, because it becomes harder to sell it, because that's how companies are gonna not get you, but like make you invested. So they try to make themselves as part of your identity, because then the more they know that the more time and energy you spend on something, the less likely it is that for you to change, because it's just a nature of energy. Occam's razor. So that generates the gravitational force of the funnel of the company, and it captures people like that through tribe mentality. And this is the reason why it's very hard to design a social media company that is balanced, because naturally human beings are hacked by technology to create these vicious cycles that keeps everyone trapped on these paradigms. So yeah, there isn't a wrong or right answer, but you have to be careful with that. And I think that it does make sense in a lot of situations to keep doing what you're doing, because you can't do, like, you are human, so like you can't learn everything at the same time. So it does make sense that people get attached to the things that they do because they have to survive. But at the same time, the more you believe in that illusion, the stronger you're gonna fight against it, and the more unconscious you're gonna be, which is gonna make you a slave of stuff that you can't control. So I think I want to stop here because I'm already very tired. So next time I'm gonna continue to do this stuff here. And the next thing I'm gonna try to do is set spatial material for this so that hopefully it doesn't become transparent when I circle around. But even if it does like this, if it stays like this, I think I'm just gonna move on from this and keep this thing. Just gonna adjust the size of the arrow so that is on a ratio that I think it makes sense. Then once I achieve this, the next thing to do is to figure out create a class for zooming and panning with the camera. Class that has the default zooming and panning that I want, which is the same zooming and panning I have here to visualize this thing. After I do this, then the next thing is to finish the Barnsut algorithm, which is the solver that I have here. It's probably the best solver that I found to visualize these kinds of simulations. Then finish this component here and connect the component with the visualization and finish the graph class. So that's I create. I'm gonna test first with 2 spheres only to see if the connection of the arrow is correct. But obviously, I think for maybe I test even the movement of the 2 things on the graph function. So on the graph class, I'm gonna set the process equal to true, which allows me to update the state of the class at each frame of the visualization for the thing. Inside of the function that I'm gonna call in the process notification, I can update the values of the nodes by some random thing that I'm gonna decide there, and then update the edge and see if it is creating the connection that I want here. And is maintaining is doing the thing that it's supposed to do here. Once I figure that out, then I think I'm gonna figure that out before I do the camera because it makes more sense now. So I figured this out, then I figure out the camera to do because I think I can test this directly from the editor. If I just move the positions inside of the C++ class, I think the editor is gonna be. I'm gonna test to see if it picks it up. It probably will, I think. And if that works, then I'm gonna create another class that is gonna inherit from camera and is gonna put this panning and zooming by default, which I'm probably gonna get from the other project that I created. If I can't find examples of the panning and zooming that I want here from GDScript and then transfer them to C++. Then once I have that, then I think once I have everything, then maybe next thing to do is to figure out the layouts. But I think from that point, I'm gonna start thinking more about what kind of stuff I can build with these things here. So yeah, see you next time.